of John. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly, I tell you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Sometimes at our house, when someone says something like, "I can't do it, it's too hard," I respond with, "You can do hard things." To be frank, I don't know if it always helps, but I know when I've heard it spoken to me, as I've heard it spoken to me through the pandemic, it gives me some courage for one more step forward. You can do hard things. Our stories this week are call stories to hard things. Samuel is only a young boy when he hears God's call in the night. The word of the Lord was rare in those days. Visions weren't widespread. So this voice in the night is unfamiliar to this young boy in an age of silence from God. Finally, Eli, Samuel's mentor, puts it together that it's God's voice that is being heard. And so the next time around, Eli coaches Samuel on how to respond. And this all sounds nice and good. And, you know, when we sing the song, "Here I Am, Lord," one that I think a lot of us love, it all seems so lovely and comfortable and beautiful. But as this text says, just beyond where our reading ends, God says, "I'm about to do something in Israel that will make both ears of anyone who hears it tingle." Then God goes on to announce judgment on Eli, on Samuel's mentor. You see, Eli's sons are real twerps. But really, I don't think that's even a strong enough word. They were abusers. They blasphemed God. They stole the best portions of the sacrifices that were made to God. They stole them for themselves, and they raped the women who were serving and guarding the entrance to the tent of meeting. And their dad, Eli, his failure was that he stayed silent. He didn't hold his sons accountable for their wicked ways. And God was heartbroken for the failure of all of them. So God called Samuel to tell his mentor this word of judgment. God called Samuel to tell Eli that their family was done serving in the temple. They had lost their sacred job. So God called Samuel to do a hard thing. And it kept Samuel up all night long. He was afraid to tell Eli the truth of this vision. He was afraid to tell him what he heard from God. But Samuel did. Samuel did the hard thing, and Eli had to face a hard truth. And from then on, the Lord was with Samuel, and as it says, just following our verses, throughout Israel, Samuel was a trustworthy prophet of the Lord. In our reading from the Gospel of John, Jesus is calling his first disciples. There's energy and excitement and hope and possibility at this point of the story. Philip tells Nathanael, come and see this one that Moses and the prophets have talked about. Nathanael, though, is filled with doubt because the so-called Messiah came from the wrong side of the tracks, and really nothing good can come from the wrong side of the tracks. But when Nathanael meets Jesus, and Jesus already knows him, Nathanael's doubt is transformed to faith, his skepticism transformed to confession, and Jesus invites him along to see greater things than these. And right now, it all seems intriguing and quite exciting, but we know how the story unfolds. Jesus invites the disciples into hard things, to follow a new way of life that challenges the old conventions and status quo, to kneel before another and serve them, and that define greatness, and to live that most important commandment, to love. This call would lead Jesus and his disciples down a path of ridicule, persecution, and eventually Jesus' death. They didn't know it at the moment of call, but following Jesus would be a hard thing. As we turn to another story of a saint we celebrate today, Martin Luther King Jr., we have another call story to a hard thing. God called Martin to reveal a vision of the kingdom of God where all people are recognized as created in the image of God, worthy of rights and dignity. He helped a nation see the kingdom Jesus proclaimed, and he did it guided by Jesus's teaching of love and service. But this call came with a word of judgment, a hard word to deliver to a nation and a people who benefited from the status quo. Martin rattled people and made them angry. We celebrate him as a hero today, but as many of you know, back then, Martin was considered a threat to be handled. He too was ridiculed and persecuted and eventually assassinated because some thought his word was too hard to hear. We're in the midst of hard things right now. A pandemic, still, social and political unrest. And in light of both of those things, we're facing hard things of how we live out our baptismal call at this moment. We're trying to stay grounded in faith and hope in the midst of so much that might cause despair. We're doing the hard thing of figuring out when to speak, where to speak, when not to speak, while holding intention that silence can also be dangerous. We're still figuring out life in the midst of restrictions with the shadow of fear that COVID lays over life. And all the while, our own lives are filled with struggle and disappointment, and the burdens seem to pile up on our shoulders. There's a list of hard things right now. We can do hard things. You can do hard things. God even calls us to hard things. And that voice of God calls now. It's the voice of one who beckons us still to come and see. Come and see the greater things God can do when justice and mercy reign. It's the voice of one who knows us deeply and completely and calls us in our brokenness and in our giftedness to follow Jesus' ways of truth and life, service and love. It's the voice of God who sends a word of hope to our despair so that we can take one more step forward. The God who calls us to hard things also promises to be faithful. God speaks to us through this word to remind us of that call that he has placed in our hearts and in our lives. God feeds us with the bread of life and the cup of salvation, a feast that gives us courage for each next faithful step. God has given us a community to talk with and walk with and sing with and pray with, to surround us with that sense of togetherness, that we don't do this alone. And even more, God promises to be with us always, so that we never do the hard things alone. We can do hard things. You can do hard things. God has called us, and God is with us. Thanks be to God.